The bitter October wind howled across the Montana Territory as Theodora Evans clutched the tattered letter against her chest, the stagecoach lurching violently beneath her. 1873 had proven to be the most tumultuous year of her 22 years of life, and as Tombstone's jagged silhouette appeared on the horizon, she wondered if she had made the gravest mistake of her existence by agreeing to marry a man she'd never met. "First time to Tombstone, miss?" The elderly woman across from her inquired, her weathered face creasing into a sympathetic smile. Theodora nodded, forcing a polite response despite the nauseating combination of anxiety and stage-coach sickness. "Yes, madam. I've come from Boston to be married." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mail-order bride, then. Plenty of those coming west these days. Who's the lucky fella?" "Mr. Arnold Blackburn," Theodora replied, the name still foreign on her tongue. "He owns the Mercantile, I'm told." The stagecoach fell uncomfortably silent. The elderly woman exchanged glances with the other passengers, and Theodora's stomach twisted with fresh worry. "What?" she asked, unable to mask the tremor in her voice. "Is something wrong with Mr. Blackburn?" "No, no," the woman said quickly. "It's just that." "Well, Arnold Blackburn is nearly 65, dear. Didn't he mention that in his letters?" Theodora's heart sank. The man had described himself as mature and established, but she had envisioned someone perhaps in his 40s, not old enough to be her grandfather. Still, what choice did she have? Her parents' death from influenza had left her penniless and alone in Boston. This marriage was her only chance at security. The stagecoach rumbled into Tombstone just as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street. Theodora gathered her single trunk containing all that remained of her previous life and stepped down into the alien landscape of her new home. Her legs wobbled after the long journey, and she smoothed down her travel-worn blue dress, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look with her Eastern attire and terrified expression. Tombstone was exactly as she'd feared. A rough mining town filled with saloons, brothels, and weathered men who stared at her with undisguised interest. A small crowd had gathered at the stagecoach stop, presumably to collect packages or meet arriving travelers. Theodora scanned the faces anxiously, searching for the man who would become her husband. Mr. Blackburn had sent a daguerreotype with his proposal letter, showing a stern-faced, balding man with a prominent nose. "Miss Evans." A thin, stooped figure pushed through the crowd, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the sunlight. It was indeed Arnold Blackburn, looking even older than his picture suggested. "I am most pleased you've arrived safely." Theodora forced a smile and extended her gloved hand. "Mr. Blackburn, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." Before Blackburn could take her hand, another voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Hold on just a minute." The crowd parted and a tall man strode forward. Theodora's breath caught in her throat. Unlike the other dusty, weather-beaten men of Tombstone, this stranger carried himself with a quiet confidence. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his striking blue eyes locked onto hers with unsettling intensity. "I believe there's been a mistake," the man said, his voice deep and steady. He turned to Blackburn. "This woman was promised to me." Blackburn's face reddened. "What nonsense is this, Kincaid? I paid the agency in full. I have the contract right here." He patted his breast pocket. "Victor Kincaid." The stranger introduced himself to Theodora, ignoring Blackburn completely. "And there's been a misunderstanding. I sent for a bride 3 months ago, and you match the description exactly." Theodora's mind raced. She had corresponded with Arnold Blackburn for months. His letters had been proper, if somewhat dull, detailing the modest but comfortable life she could expect as the wife of a mercantile owner. There had never been any mention of a Victor Kincaid. "I don't understand," she said, looking between the two men. "My arrangement was with Mr. Blackburn." "This is outrageous," Blackburn sputtered. Sheriff Hollister, a broad-shouldered man with a tin star pinned to his vest, pushed through the now substantial crowd of onlookers. "What's all this commotion about, Arnold? This cowboy is trying to steal my bride." Blackburn pointed accusingly at Victor. Sheriff Hollister sighed, looking exasperated. "Kincaid, what are you playing at now?" "I'm not playing at anything," Victor replied calmly. "I contacted the Westward Brides Agency in March. Paid for a bride with auburn hair, educated from Boston. Miss Evans here fits that description precisely." "As did the description I provided," Blackburn insisted. "But I have the contract and the lady's name specifically." The sheriff turned to Theodora. "Madam, I apologize for this. Unusual welcome to Tombstone." "Who exactly were you corresponding with?" Theodora felt heat rise to her cheeks as every eye in the vicinity fixed on her. "Mr. Arnold Blackburn," she said firmly. "I have all his letters." "Well, that settles it," Blackburn said triumphantly. Victor Kincaid's expression darkened. "Sheriff, I suspect there's been fraud at the agency." "I paid good money. That's your problem, not mine," Blackburn interrupted. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Evans must be exhausted from her journey." Victor stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Miss Evans, I don't mean to frighten you, but I believe you should know that Mr. Blackburn has already buried 3 wives." A horrified gasp escaped Theodora's lips before she could stop it. "How dare you?" Blackburn hissed. "Natural causes, all of them. And I won't have you spreading vicious rumors." "Is it a rumor that your last wife was 30 years younger than you and died within a year of arriving in Tombstone?" Victor challenged. The sheriff raised his hands. "That's enough, both of you." He turned to Theodora. "Miss, it seems we have a situation here. Neither of these men is likely to back down, and I can't force you to honor a contract if there's been some kind of mix-up." Theodora's head spun. She was alone in a strange town, with no funds to return east, and now caught between 2 men claiming her as their bride. One was old enough to be her grandfather, with a suspicious history of deceased wives. The other was a handsome stranger making equally suspicious claims about a contract that bore no relation to her arrangements. I need time to think," she managed. "Of course you do, my dear," Blackburn said, suddenly solicitous. "You'll stay at the hotel tonight at my expense, and we can sort this out tomorrow after you've rested." "The hotel's full up," Sheriff Hollister said. "Mining convention from Bisbee. She can stay with Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house," Victor suggested. "Neutral ground, proper and respectable," the sheriff nodded. "That's sensible. Mrs. Henderson runs a tight ship, no funny business." Blackburn reluctantly agreed, though his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Very well. But I expect this matter resolved first thing tomorrow. The preacher is ready for our wedding." Theodora's knees nearly buckled. "Tomorrow? But we've only just met." "The arrangements were all made, my dear," Blackburn said, patting her hand in a way that made her skin crawl. "No sense in delaying." "The lady said she needs time," Victor interjected, his voice carrying a warning edge. Sheriff Hollister stepped between them again. "It's settled. Miss Evans stays with Mrs. Henderson tonight, and we'll sort this out tomorrow. I'll escort the lady myself." As the sheriff led her away, Theodora glanced back to see the 2 men staring daggers at each other. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, how would she find her way out? Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a modest 2-story structure with lace curtains that seemed almost defiantly civilized amidst Tombstone's roughness. The proprietress herself was a stout, no-nonsense widow in her 50s who welcomed Theodora with unexpected warmth. "Mail-order brides have it tough," she said matter-of-factly as she showed Theodora to a small but clean room. "Especially in a place like Tombstone. Men outnumber women 20 to 1, and not all of them remember their manners. Mrs. Henderson," Theodora began hesitantly, "do you know anything about Mr. Blackburn or Mr. Kincaid?" The older woman's expression grew guarded. "It's not my place to speak ill of potential customers." "Please," Theodora urged. "I'm alone here with no family to advise me." "I need to know what kind of men they are," Mrs. Henderson sighed, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. "Arnold Blackburn is the wealthiest man in town, owns the mercantile and has interests in several mines. He's been widowed 3 times. Some say it's bad luck, others." She trailed off. "And Mr. Kincaid. Victor Kincaid runs the largest cattle ranch outside of town. Came here 5 years ago from Texas. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair in his dealings. Never known him to lie." She paused. "Though I've never heard him mention sending for a bride either." Theodora sank down beside Mrs. Henderson. "I don't know what to do. I spent every penny getting here. I can't go back." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "Get some rest. Things often look clearer in the morning." But sleep proved elusive. Theodora lay awake, replaying the day's events. She had come west with modest expectations, a respectable marriage, if not a romantic one. Security and perhaps, in time, companionship. Now she faced a choice between a man she instinctively distrusted and one she knew nothing about. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She wrapped her shawl around her nightdress and opened the door a crack. A young girl of about 14 stood there, fidgeting nervously. "Miss, Mr. Kincaid asked me to give you this." She thrust a folded note into Theodora's hand and scurried away before questions could be asked. Theodora unfolded the note with trembling fingers. "Miss Evans, I apologize for the confusion today. I would appreciate a chance to explain myself more fully. If you are amenable, I will call for you at 9 tomorrow morning before your meeting with Blackburn. Respectfully, Victor Kincaid." Theodora stared at the neat, educated handwriting. It didn't match the rough cowboy image she had expected. Could his claim be legitimate? Or was this some scheme too? What? She couldn't imagine what he might gain by falsely claiming her as his bride. Morning came too quickly. Theodora dressed carefully in her best day dress, a forest green wool that complemented her auburn hair. Whatever decision she made today would shape the rest of her life. She wanted to face it with dignity. Precisely at 9, Mrs. Henderson knocked at her door. "Mr. Kincaid is here to see you." "I've put him in the parlor. Door stays open, mind you." Theodora nodded gratefully. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Henderson." Victor Kincaid stood as she entered the parlor. He had exchanged yesterday's trail-worn clothes for a clean shirt and dark vest. Without the hat, she could see his face more clearly, strong-jawed and weathered by sun and wind, but younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30. "Miss Evans, thank you for seeing me." She remained near the door. "Your note said you wished to explain. I'm listening." Victor gestured to a chair, waiting for her to sit before taking his own seat. "First, I want to assure you that I have no intention of forcing you into any arrangement. What happened yesterday was unexpected." "You claimed I was promised to you," she reminded him. "That was a lie." He looked genuinely troubled. "Not exactly. I did contact a bride agency in March. I did send money for passage for a woman matching your description. But the name they gave me was Teresa Edwards." Theodora blinked in surprise. "That's remarkably close to my name." "Too close for coincidence," Victor agreed. "I believe someone at the agency made a mistake, or perhaps something more deliberate." Are you suggesting fraud? I'm suggesting the possibility. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. Miss Evans, what do you know about Arnold Blackburn? She hesitated. Only what his letters told me, that he owns the mercantile, that he's respected in the community. Did he mention his age, his previous marriages? No, she admitted. But that doesn't mean I should trust you instead. I don't know you at all. Victor nodded slowly. That's fair. So let me tell you about myself. I came to Arizona 5 years ago and built my ranch from nothing. It's prosperous now, 3,000 acres, 500 head of cattle, a decent house. I've worked hard to make it a success, but it's lonely work. So you sent for a bride, Theodora said flatly. Like ordering supplies for your ranch. A flash of something hurt perhaps crossed his face. It wasn't like that. I wanted a partner, someone with her own mind. That's why I specified educated. I don't need a servant or a brood mare. His cheeks colored slightly at the crude term. I want a wife who can share my life, my home. Despite herself, Theodora was intrigued. His words held none of the condescension that had characterized Blackburn's letters, with their repeated references to her feminine duties and wifely obligations. Even if what you say is true, she said carefully, it doesn't change the fact that I corresponded with Mr. Blackburn, not you. I understand that, and if you've formed an attachment to him through these letters, I won't interfere. Victor held her gaze steadily. But if you have any doubts, I'm asking you to consider an alternative. Which is, come see my ranch, meet my foreman and his wife. They can vouch for my character. Take time to make your decision rather than rushing into marriage with a man you met yesterday. It was a tempting proposition. Blackburn's insistence on an immediate wedding had alarmed her. And if I decide against both of you, I'll give you enough money to return east or to go wherever you choose. He smiled slightly at her surprised expression. I told you, I'm not looking to trap anyone into marriage. Before Theodora could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. Miss Evans, Mr. Blackburn is here, along with Sheriff Hollister. They're waiting in the dining room. Theodora's stomach knotted with anxiety. She wasn't ready to face Blackburn yet, not before she'd had time to consider Victor's words. Victor stood, offering his hand to help her up. Whatever you decide, I'll abide by it, he said quietly. The gentle pressure of his hand was reassuring, and Theodora drew strength from it as she followed Mrs. Henderson to the dining room, Victor a step behind. Arnold Blackburn's face darkened when he saw Victor. What is he doing here? He demanded. I invited Mr. Kincaid to join our discussion, Theodora said, surprising herself with her steady voice. Sheriff Hollister nodded approvingly. Good. Let's get this sorted out civilly. They sat around Mrs. Henderson's polished table, the tension palpable. Blackburn immediately withdrew a folded document from his coat. This is my contract with the Westward Brides Agency, specifying Theodora Evans of Boston, Massachusetts. He slid it across to the sheriff. Sheriff Hollister examined it. Seems in order. Kincaid, you have similar documentation. Victor nodded, producing his own papers. For Teresa Edwards, but the description matches Miss Evans exactly. The sheriff compared the documents with a frown. These were both issued by the same agency within weeks of each other. He looked up. I'm starting to think someone's running a scam. That's preposterous, Blackburn protested. I've done business with them for years. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. Years? How many brides have you ordered, Arnold? Blackburn's face flushed. That's hardly relevant. The point is, Miss Evans corresponded with me. She agreed to marry me. All eyes turned to Theodora. She took a deep breath. I did correspond with Mr. Blackburn, believing we had an understanding. However, certain facts were omitted from his letters. Such as, the sheriff prompted, his age, his previous marriages. She hesitated, then continued more boldly. And his expectation that we would marry immediately, without any period of acquaintance. Blackburn's expression hardened. The agreement was clear. I paid for your passage west in exchange for marriage. I understand that, Theodora acknowledged, and I'm not refusing to honor my obligation. I'm merely asking for time to become acquainted before making such a significant commitment. Time for him to turn you against me, Blackburn snapped, glaring at Victor. That's unfair, Victor said calmly. I've suggested that Miss Evans take time to know both of us before making her decision. The sheriff studied both men, then turned to Theodora. Miss, what would you prefer? It's your future at stake here. Theodora straightened her shoulders. I would like 1 week to better understand my situation and options. A week, Blackburn protested. I have the preacher waiting. The preacher can wait, Sheriff Hollister said firmly. 1 week seems reasonable. And where will she stay during this time? Blackburn demanded. With him. He jerked his head toward Victor. I've offered to show Miss Evans my ranch, Victor said, and to introduce her to my foreman and his wife, who could act as chaperones. But I would suggest she continue staying with Mrs. Henderson in town to maintain propriety. Mrs. Henderson nodded. She's welcome here as long as she needs. Blackburn's thin lips pressed into a tight line. This is highly irregular. So is the situation, the sheriff pointed out. 1 week, Arnold. You've waited this long for a bride, you can wait a bit longer. After more grumbling, Blackburn reluctantly agreed. 1 week, not a day more. And I expect to have equal opportunity to court the lady. Once Blackburn had left, Sheriff Hollister turned to Victor. I'm going to wire the Westward Brides Agency and see what I can find out about this mix-up. In the meantime, I'd advise you both to be careful. Arnold Blackburn has a lot of influence in this town. Victor nodded grimly. I'm aware. When they were alone, Victor turned to Theodora. My offer stands. Would you like to see the ranch tomorrow? Theodora hesitated only briefly. Yes, I would. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October day in the Arizona Territory. Victor arrived punctually with a light buggy drawn by a handsome bay horse. Mrs. Henderson, ever vigilant, insisted on seeing them off with a basket of provisions and a reminder to return before dark. As they left Tombstone behind, Theodora felt herself relaxing for the first time since her arrival. The landscape was unlike anything she had known in Boston, vast, open, with mountains rising dramatically in the distance. It's beautiful, she murmured. In a wild sort of way. Victor smiled. It grows on you. When I first came here from Texas, I thought it was too harsh, too unforgiving. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. Why did you leave Texas? A shadow crossed his face. The war changed everything. My family lost our land. My parents died of fever the same year. I'm sorry, Theodora said softly. I lost my parents to influenza last winter. Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. It's hard to be alone in the world, Victor acknowledged. Is that why you sent for a bride? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horse around a bend in the road. Partly. But mostly because I've built something here, something good, and I wanted someone to share it with. His honesty was refreshing after Blackburn's evasions. Tell me about your ranch, she prompted. Victor's face lit up as he described the operation he had built, the challenges and triumphs, the rhythm of ranch life. Theodora found herself genuinely interested, asking questions that seemed to please and surprise him. Most women don't care about cattle breeding or water rights, he said with a laugh. Most women aren't facing a choice between two strangers for a husband, she countered. If I'm to make an informed decision, I need to understand what life with either of you would entail. He nodded approvingly. That's fair, he pointed ahead. We're almost there. That's Kincaid Ranch. The property came into view as they crested a hill. Theodora's eyes widened. She had expected something primitive, but the ranch house was substantial, a handsome two-story building with a wide porch wrapping around it. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the vast grassland. "It's impressive," she admitted. "It's home," he said simply. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, waving enthusiastically. About 40, with a kind face and graying hair pulled into a practical bun, she hurried down to meet them. "You must be Miss Evans. I'm Martha Walsh, and that man over there pretending not to be curious is my husband, Frank." She pointed to a weather-beaten cowboy who tipped his hat from a respectful distance. Victor made formal introductions. "Frank is my foreman. He and Martha have been with me since I started the ranch. I trust them with everything." Martha beamed at Theodora. "We've been telling Victor for years he needs a wife. The house is too big for a bachelor, and Lord knows the man can't cook worth a damn." "Martha," Victor groaned, but with obvious affection. "Well, it's true." Martha linked her arm through Theodora's. "Come inside, dear. I've prepared lunch, and I want to show you around. I expect you have questions about what life out here is really like." Over the next few hours, Martha proved to be exactly what Theodora needed: a forthright, female perspective on Victor Kincaid and life on his ranch. While Victor was called away to deal with a problem at the corral, Martha showed Theodora through the house. "He built it bigger than he needed," Martha explained, showing her a sunny room that was clearly meant to be a parlor but contained only a desk and bookshelf. Always planning for the future, that one. Theodora ran her fingers along the bookshelf, surprised by the diverse collection: novels, poetry, history, scientific texts. "He reads a great deal. Every night. Sends to Tucson for new books regular as clockwork." Martha smiled knowingly. "Surprised?" "A little," Theodora admitted. "I didn't expect a rancher to be so literary. Victor Kincaid is full of surprises. His father was a professor before the family lost everything in the war." Martha lowered her voice. "He doesn't talk about it much, but he had quite an education before circumstances forced him into ranching." Theodora thought of her own disrupted education, the girls' academy she'd been forced to leave after her parents' death. Another unexpected commonality between them. "Martha," she began hesitantly, "what kind of man is he really? I need to know the truth." Martha's expression grew serious. "The best kind, fair, honest, hardworking, never raises his voice even when the men make mistakes. Generous, too, helped Frank and me build our own cabin when we wanted more privacy than the bunkhouse." She paused. "But he's no saint, stubborn as a mule sometimes, works too hard, and he carries ghosts from the war that wake him at night." "And has there been anyone, any woman?" Martha shook her head. "Not since I've known him. Frank says there was someone in Texas before, but it ended badly." She studied Theodora's face. "He wouldn't have sent for a bride if he wasn't ready for marriage, Miss Evans. Victor doesn't do anything halfway." By the time they rejoined Victor for a tour of the ranch operations, Theodora found herself increasingly drawn to this complex man. He was clearly respected by his workers, who straightened and touched their hats when he approached. He knew each man by name, inquired after families, demonstrated a genuine concern for their welfare. It was all a stark contrast to Arnold Blackburn, whose letters had been full of references to his status and wealth, but devoid of warmth or real personal detail. As the afternoon waned, Victor suggested they walk along the creek that ran through the property. Martha discreetly remained behind, though within sight of the house to maintain propriety. "What do you think?" Victor asked as they strolled alongside the burbling water. "Could you see yourself here?" Theodora considered the question seriously. "It's a beautiful place, and you've built something impressive. But, he prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, but I still don't understand why there was confusion about my identity. If you were expecting someone named Teresa Edwards, why claim me at the stagecoach stop? Victor stopped walking, turning to face her fully. When I saw you step off that coach, you matched the description I'd been given exactly. And then I heard Blackburn call you Miss Evans so close to Edwards, and everything clicked into place. His blue eyes held her steadily. I believe someone at that agency is placing the same women with multiple men, collecting fees from each. That's criminal, Theodora breathed. And cruel, Victor agreed. To the women especially who travel thousands of miles only to find themselves in impossible situations. Like mine. Yes, his expression softened. I acted impulsively yesterday, and for that I apologize. But I couldn't stand by and watch you walk away with Blackburn without at least trying to warn you. About his previous wives, Victor nodded grimly. 3 women, all from back east, all younger than him by decades, all dead within 2 years of arriving in Tombstone. A chill ran through Theodora despite the warm afternoon. How did they die, officially? Fever, accident, childbirth complications, but there were rumors. He trailed off. What kind of rumors? The kind that never stick to a man as wealthy as Blackburn. Victor's jaw tightened. The last one, Elizabeth, she tried to leave him, packed her bags, bought a stage-coach ticket. The next day she was found at the bottom of their cellar stairs. Broken neck. Theodora's hand flew to her throat. And you think he? I can't prove anything. Nobody can. That's why he's still free to send for another bride. The frustration in Victor's voice was palpable. When I saw you yesterday, I couldn't let it happen again without at least trying to intervene. They walked in silence for a while, the gravity of his words settling between them. Eventually, Theodora spoke. Thank you for your honesty and for showing me your home. Does this mean you're considering my proposal? There was a vulnerable note in his voice that touched her. I'm considering everything, she said carefully. But yes, I find myself drawn to the life you've described. A smile broke across his face, transforming his serious features. That's all I can ask for, a fair consideration. As they drove back to Tombstone in the golden light of late afternoon, Theodora found herself studying Victor's profile. He was handsome, yes, but more importantly, he seemed genuinely good, a man of principle and quiet strength. Tell me about Boston, he said, breaking the companionable silence. What was your life like there? She told him about growing up as the daughter of a bookstore owner, her education at Miss Porter's Academy for Young Ladies, her love of literature and music. She spoke of her parents' death and the subsequent discovery that her father's business had been failing, leaving her with debts rather than inheritance. The mail-order bride advertisement seemed like the only option, she concluded. I had no family to turn to, no prospects in Boston. You're very brave, Victor said simply. Or very desperate, she countered. Sometimes they're the same thing. When they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, Victor handed her down from the buggy with gentle hands. May I call on you tomorrow? Yes, she said, surprising herself with the eagerness in her voice. I'd like that. Mrs. Henderson met her at the door with a strange expression. Mr. Blackburn was here earlier, she said. Seemed quite put out that you'd gone with Mr. Kincaid, left this for you. She handed Theodora a small package. Inside was an expensive gold brooch and a note. A token of my esteem. Remember your commitment. A.B. The jewelry felt heavy and cold in her hand. A bribe, a reminder of his wealth. Either way, it left her feeling uncomfortable. She slept poorly that night, dreams filled with cellar stairs and falling, endless falling. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Sheriff Hollister arrived as Theodora was finishing breakfast, his expression grave. "Miss Evans, I've received a reply to my telegraph to the Westward Brides Agency." He glanced at Mrs. Henderson. "Perhaps we should speak privately." In the parlor, the sheriff handed her a yellow telegraph form. "I'm afraid it confirms Mr. Kincaid's suspicions." The message was brief but damning. No record of Teresa Edwards' stop, only Theodora Evans contracted to Blackburn stop Kincaid never client stop. Theodora stared at the paper. "But this can't be right. Mr. Kincaid showed me his contract." The sheriff nodded grimly, "which suggests forgery. Either Kincaid is lying or someone at the agency is." "I don't believe Victor would lie about this," Theodora said firmly. "Neither do I, to be honest," Sheriff Hollister admitted. "I've known him for 5 years, and he's always been straight as an arrow." "But Blackburn has connections in San Francisco, where the agency operates. It wouldn't be difficult for him to have them deny any record of Kincaid's contract." Theodora sank into a chair. "So I can't trust the agency's word either." "I'm afraid not." "You'll have to use your own judgment, Miss Evans." After the sheriff left, Theodora paced the small parlor, trying to organize her thoughts. Both men had presented compelling cases. Both had documentation. One was lying, but which one? Her contemplation was interrupted by another visitor. Arnold Blackburn himself arrived, dressed in his finest suit and carrying a bouquet of hothouse flowers that must have cost a small fortune to obtain in Tombstone. "My dear Miss Evans," he greeted her with a tight smile. "I hope you found my gift acceptable." "It was very generous," she said carefully, "though unnecessary." His smile faltered slightly. "Nonsense. A beautiful woman deserves beautiful things." He presented the flowers with a flourish. "I've come to invite you to dinner at my home this evening. It's time you saw where you'll be living as my wife." The presumption irritated her, but Theodora reminded herself that she had promised to give both men fair consideration. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. I would be pleased to accept, provided Mrs. Henderson can accompany me as chaperone." His expression soured momentarily before smoothing into polite acceptance. "Of course. Most proper. Shall we say 6 o'clock?" After he departed, Theodora sought out Mrs. Henderson. "Would you mind terribly accompanying me to Mr. Blackburn's home this evening? I don't wish to go alone." "Child, I wouldn't let you go there alone if you paid me," Mrs. Henderson said bluntly. "That man gives me the shivers, respectable businessman or not." Blackburn's home proved to be the grandest in Tombstone, a 2-story brick mansion that looked jarringly out of place among the town's predominantly wooden structures. A servant showed them into a formal parlor decorated with expensive imported furnishings and heavy velvet draperies that blocked much of the natural light. "You approve?" Blackburn asked, watching her face closely as she examined the room. "It's very impressive," Theodora said diplomatically. The house was undeniably luxurious, but it felt oppressive, dark and airless compared to the light-filled openness of Victor's ranch house. Dinner was served in a formal dining room by a thin, nervous maid who never made eye contact. The meal was elaborate by frontier standards, multiple courses served on fine china, but Blackburn dominated the conversation, speaking at length about his business interests, his standing in the community, and the many material advantages Theodora would enjoy as his wife. Not once did he ask about her interests, her thoughts, or her feelings. After dinner, he insisted on giving her a tour of the house, with Mrs. Henderson trailing discreetly behind. The upper floor contained several bedrooms, including one he identified as the master suite, with an emphasis that made Theodora blush uncomfortably. "And this," he said, opening a door to a small, sparsely furnished room, "would be your study. where you could pursue your feminine interests, needlework, correspondence, and such. Theodora peered into the cheerless space, thinking of the book-filled parlor at Victor's ranch. "Do you enjoy reading, Mr. Blackburn?" she asked. He waved a dismissive hand. "Business documents, newspapers when necessary. I've never had time for frivolous fiction." "I see," she murmured. The cellar was the last stop on the tour, and Theodora's pulse quickened as Blackburn opened the door to the steep, narrow stairs. "My wine cellar," he said proudly. "The finest collection in the territory." Theodora froze at the top of the stairs, Victor's words echoing in her mind. "The last one, Elizabeth, she was found at the bottom of their cellar stairs. Broken neck. I'm a bit fatigued," she said quickly. "Perhaps we could skip this part of the tour." Blackburn's eyes narrowed slightly. "As you wish." When they prepared to leave, Blackburn took Theodora's hand, his grip uncomfortably tight. "You will make your decision soon, I trust. The week is passing quickly." "Yes, Mr. Blackburn," she assured him. "By the end of the week, as agreed." His eyes were cold despite his smile. "Excellent. I've waited long enough for a new wife." The possessive tone in his voice sent a chill through her. As they walked back to the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson broke her usual discretion. "That man is not right," she muttered. "Did you notice how that poor maid trembled whenever he spoke? And that house like a mausoleum," Theodora had noticed, and much more. The lack of any personal touches in the grand house. The way Blackburn spoke of her as an acquisition rather than a partner. The calculating look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. She slept poorly again that night, her dreams now filled with dark cellars and locked doors. The next morning brought a welcome distraction in the form of Victor, who invited her to join him for a picnic lunch by the river just outside of town. Mrs. Henderson, seeing Theodora's drawn face, insisted she go. "Fresh air and pleasant company will do you good after last night's ordeal," she said firmly. The spot Victor had chosen was lovely, a grassy bank beside the San Pedro River, shaded by cottonwood trees. He spread a blanket and unpacked a simple but delicious meal of cold chicken, fresh bread, and early apples. "You look troubled," he observed as they ate. Theodora hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I visited Mr. Blackburn's home last night." Victor's expression darkened. "I see." It was illuminating. She told him about the house, the dinner, Blackburn's manner. "And did it help you make your decision?" Victor asked carefully. "The sheriff received a telegram from the bride agency," she replied instead of answering directly. "They claim you were never their client, that your contract must be a forgery." Victor's jaw tightened. "Blackburn's influence at work. The man has connections everywhere." "That's what the sheriff suggested as well." She studied his face. "Victor, I need to know the truth, all of it. Why are you really so determined to protect me from Blackburn?" He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the river. Finally, he spoke. "My sister. Your sister, Rebecca." His voice was rough with emotion. "After we lost our home in Texas, we came west together. I took work as a ranch hand while she found a position as a teacher in Tucson. But the school closed and she was desperate. She answered an advertisement, a mail-order bride agency." Theodora guessed softly. Victor nodded. 3 years ago, she was matched with a man in Prescott. Wealthy, respected, Simon Caldwell. A sense of dread filled Theodora. "What happened to her?" 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter. She was frightened, said Caldwell had changed, become controlling, violent. By the time I reached Prescott, she was dead. His hands clenched. "Fell down the stairs," they said. "Accident." No one questioned it. Caldwell was too important, too well connected. "I'm so sorry," Theodora whispered, reaching for his hand. "When I saw you step off that stagecoach, promised to a man with a history of dead wives, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not again. He met her eyes, his own filled with pain and determination. I did contact a bride agency. That part was true. But when I saw you with Blackburn, I knew I had to intervene even if it meant bending the truth. The revelation should have angered her he had lied, after all, but instead, Theodora felt a rush of understanding. You were trying to protect me, even though you didn't know me. Yes, and then, after meeting you. His voice softened. The idea of you becoming my wife stopped being just about protection and became something I truly wanted. The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within her. Without planning to, Theodora leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. Victor froze for an instant, then responded with a tenderness that made her heart race. When they parted, his eyes searched hers with wonder. "I'm sorry," she said, flushing. "That was terribly forward of me." "Don't apologize," he murmured. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you." They spent the afternoon talking, really talking, sharing stories of their lives, their losses, their hopes. Victor told her about building his ranch from nothing, about his dreams for the future. Theodora spoke of her love of teaching, how she had hoped to become a teacher before her parents' death forced her to seek another path. "You could still teach," Victor said. "There's no school near the ranch, but there are children, the hands' kids, neighboring ranchers' families. They have to ride miles to town for schooling." The idea kindled excitement in her. "You wouldn't mind a wife with her own occupation?" "Mind," he laughed. "I'd be proud. The territory needs educated women like you, Theodora." By the time they returned to town, the sun was setting, painting the desert in gold and crimson. Theodora felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt hope for her future, not just security, but happiness. That evening, as she sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor writing in her journal, a commotion at the front door drew her attention. Raised voices, then Mrs. Henderson's alarmed call. "Miss Evans, come quickly." She hurried to the entryway to find Sheriff Hollister supporting a bloodied Victor. His face was bruised, one eye swelling shut, and he clutched his ribs as if they pained him. "Victor," she gasped, rushing forward. "What happened?" "Ambush," he ground out. "3 men just outside of town." Mrs. Henderson helped the sheriff guide Victor to a chair. "I'll fetch water and bandages," she said, hurrying away. "Did you recognize them?" Sheriff Hollister asked. Victor shook his head, wincing at the movement. "They wore masks, but they delivered a message. Stay away from what doesn't belong to you." Theodora's blood ran cold. "Blackburn," she whispered. "We can't prove that," the sheriff cautioned, though his expression suggested he shared her suspicion. "They took particular care with my hands," Victor said grimly, holding up his swollen, bruised knuckles. "Said a rancher needs his hands." "A warning," Sheriff Hollister concluded. Mrs. Henderson returned with medical supplies and began cleaning Victor's wounds with practiced efficiency. "You'll stay here tonight, Mr. Kincaid," she declared. "You're in no condition to ride back to your ranch." "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," Theodora said firmly. "And you'll be safer here." The sheriff nodded agreement. "I'll post a deputy outside just to be sure, and tomorrow I'm paying Blackburn a visit." After Victor had been settled in a downstairs guest room and the sheriff had departed, Theodora sat alone in the parlor, her mind racing. The attack on Victor confirmed her worst fears about Blackburn. If he would do this to a rival, what might he do to a wife who displeased him? Her decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Even if she hadn't already been developing feelings for Victor, she could never marry Blackburn now. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway. "Mr. Kincaid is asking for you. I'll chaperone, of course." Victor was propped up on pillows, his face pale against the white bedding. Despite his injuries, his eyes brightened when she entered. "I'm sorry about this," he said. "Not exactly how I planned to end our day." "Don't apologize," she said, taking a seat beside the bed. "I'm just grateful you weren't more seriously hurt." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite his bruised knuckles. "Theodora, I need to say something. After what happened, I wouldn't blame you if you decided to return east. Tombstone is clearly not safe for you right now." "I'm not leaving," she said with quiet determination. "Blackburn is dangerous. All the more reason I can't marry him." She squeezed his hand. "Victor, I've made my decision. If your offer still stands, I choose you." Joy broke through the pain on his face. "Are you certain?" "I don't want you to choose me just because I'm the lesser of two evils." "That's not why." Her voice softened. "Today, by the river, when we talked about your future, my future, for the first time I could see it clearly. A life that would be more than just security or obligation. A true partnership," she smiled. "That's what I choose." He raised her hand to his lips. "I promise you won't regret it." The next morning, Sheriff Hollister returned with news. "I confronted Blackburn. He denied any knowledge of the attack, of course. No proof, so I couldn't arrest him." He sighed heavily. "But I made it clear that any further incidents would be thoroughly investigated, regardless of his standing in the community." "Will that be enough to deter him?" Theodora asked anxiously. "For now," the sheriff said. "But I'd suggest you two make your arrangements quickly and quietly." Their opportunity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, word spread through Tombstone that Arnold Blackburn had been called away to Tucson on urgent business, a fire at his warehouse, there requiring his immediate attention. "Providence," Mrs. Henderson declared, "or a very convenient coincidence. Either way, it provided the perfect chance." The town preacher, sympathetic to their situation after hearing Sheriff Hollister's account, agreed to marry them the following morning. "No need for finery or fuss," he told Theodora kindly. "Just bring yourselves and two witnesses." The ceremony took place at sunrise in the preacher's small study. Mrs. Henderson stood as Theodora's witness, while Frank Walsh had ridden in from the ranch to stand with Victor. Despite his still bruised face and bandaged hands, Victor had never looked more handsome to Theodora, his eyes shining with happiness as they exchanged their vows. "I, Victor Kincaid, take thee, Theodora Evans, to be my wedded wife." The simple words carried profound meaning for them both, not just a legal contract, but a promise of protection, partnership, and growing love. As the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Victor gathered her gently into his arms for a kiss that sealed their union. In that moment, Theodora knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. They left Tombstone immediately after the ceremony. A small caravan consisting of their buggy, Frank on horseback, and a rented wagon carrying Theodora's trunk and wedding gifts from Mrs. Henderson and the sheriff practical items for her new home. "What will happen when Blackburn returns?" Theodora asked as the town receded behind them. "He'll be furious," Victor acknowledged, "but there's nothing he can do. Marriage is binding and you made your choice freely." "Will he come after us?" Victor's expression hardened. "Let him try. The ranch is my territory with loyal men who'll defend what's ours." The thought was both frightening and oddly comforting. For the first time in her life, Theodora had someone willing to fight for her, to protect her at all costs. The ranch welcomed them with unexpected festivity. Martha had spread word of the marriage, and the hands and neighboring ranchers had gathered to celebrate. A makeshift dance floor had been constructed near the house. Lanterns were strung from trees, and someone had brought a fiddle. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kincaid," Victor murmured as he helped her down from the buggy. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of adjustment and discovery. Theodora learned the rhythms of ranch life: helped Martha with household management, and began to make the house truly her own. Victor's book collection expanded into the parlor, joined by Theodora's smaller library from Boston. Together they selected furniture for rooms that had stood empty, choosing pieces that reflected both their tastes. At night, they discovered each other as husband and wife, their passion tempered by Victor's innate gentleness and Theodora's initial shyness. But as trust deepened between them, so did their physical connection, until Theodora found herself anticipating their nights together with eager pleasure. True to his word, Victor supported her interest in teaching. He cleared out a small outbuilding, furnished it with desks and a blackboard, and sent word to neighboring ranches that Mrs. Kincaid would be offering lessons 3 days a week to children of all ages. "My educated wife," he said proudly, when she showed him her curriculum plans. Bringing civilization to the frontier. News from Tombstone arrived regularly through ranch hands who visited town for supplies. Arnold Blackburn had returned, furious to find his bride to be married to his rival. He had threatened legal action, but the sheriff had stood firm. Theodora had made her choice freely, and the marriage was legal and binding. "He's a dangerous enemy to have," Frank warned Victor one evening as they discussed ranch business. "I know," Victor acknowledged grimly. "Double the night watch and make sure the men are armed." Theodora tried not to let fear overshadow her happiness, but she found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, scanning the horizon when she ventured outside. Victor noticed her anxiety and did his best to reassure her. "He's a businessman first," he reminded her. "Even his anger has limits. Eventually, he'll realize it's not worth pursuing and move on." But Blackburn's anger proved more enduring than they had hoped. A month after the wedding, one of the remote line cabins was found burned to the ground. 2 weeks later, a section of fence was cut, allowing a dozen valuable cattle to escape into the desert. Coincidences? Theodora asked when Victor reported the incidents. "Not likely," he said grimly, "but still no proof." The worst came one morning in December when Victor rode out with 3 hands to check on a distant pasture. Hours later, one of the men returned at a gallop, his horse lathered and sides heaving. "Rustlers," he shouted as he dismounted. "At least 10 of them. They were waiting in ambush. Victor and the others are pinned down in the North Canyon." Frank immediately organized a rescue party, ordering Theodora and Martha to stay inside with doors barred. "And keep the shotgun handy," he added before galloping off with 8 armed men. The hours that followed were the longest of Theodora's life. She and Martha kept vigil by the window, jumping at every sound, the loaded shotgun propped against the wall nearby. "He'll be all right," Martha said repeatedly, though her voice trembled. "Victor's too stubborn to die." Dusk was falling when they finally heard hoofbeats approaching. Theodora's heart nearly stopped until she recognized Victor's tall figure leading the group. She flew out onto the porch, propriety forgotten. "Victor!" He dismounted stiffly, favoring his left side, but his arms were strong as he caught her. "I'm all right," he murmured into her hair. "Just a graze." Later, after his wound had been cleaned and bandaged, a bullet had indeed grazed his ribs, leaving a painful but not dangerous furrow. Victor told her what had happened. "It wasn't ordinary rustlers," he said grimly. "They were too organized, too well armed, and one of them called me by name." "Blackburn again," Theodora whispered. "Almost certainly, but again no proof." Victor's expression hardened. "This has to end, Theodora. I can't have you living in fear. I can't have my men at risk." "What are you going to do?" Confront him. Directly. No more proxy attacks or plausible deniability. Panic seized her. "No, that's what he wants to draw you out to." She couldn't finish the thought. Victor cupped her face gently. "I won't go alone. Sheriff Hollister will come with me. This ends now one way or another." Despite her protests, Victor's mind was made up. The next morning, he rode for Tombstone with Frank and 2 trusted hands, leaving the remaining men to guard the ranch and Theodora. The day stretched endlessly. Theodora tried to occupy herself with household tasks, then with planning lessons for her small school, but concentration eluded her. By evening, her nerves were stretched to breaking point. "Try to eat something," Martha urged, placing a bowl of stew before her. "Starving yourself won't bring him back any faster." Theodora had just forced down a few bites when they heard riders approaching. She rushed to the window, then sagged with relief at the sight of Victor, unharmed and upright in his saddle. He gathered her close as soon as he entered the house, his embrace conveying both reassurance and lingering tension. "What happened?" she asked when he finally released her. "Blackburn wasn't in Tombstone," Victor said, accepting the coffee Martha pressed into his hands. "According to his housekeeper, he left for San Francisco 3 days ago." "San Francisco?" Sheriff thinks he's gone to ground after the rustling attempt failed, or possibly to recruit more men. Victor's jaw tightened. "Either way, it gives us some breathing room," but Theodora wasn't convinced. Something about Blackburn's sudden departure felt wrong, too convenient, too calculated. "What if it's a trick? What if he wanted to draw you away from the ranch?" Victor frowned. "The men have orders to." The sound of gunfire cut him off, distant but unmistakable. "The south pasture," Frank said, already reaching for his rifle. Victor was moving before the words were fully spoken, issuing rapid orders. "Frank, get the women to the storm cellar. Tom, Jim with me. The rest of you, defensive positions around the house." "I won't hide in the cellar," Theodora protested. Victor gripped her shoulders. "Please, Theodora, I can't fight if I'm worrying about you." The intensity in his eyes persuaded her. She nodded, allowing Martha to hurry her toward the kitchen and the cellar access. The next hours were a nightmare of muffled gunfire, shouts, and terrifying uncertainty. The cellar was secure, but offered no information about what was happening above. Theodora and Martha huddled together in the darkness, straining to interpret the sounds of battle. "It's getting closer," Martha whispered as a particularly loud volley rattled the cellar doors. Theodora clutched the small revolver Victor had pressed into her hands before they descended. "If they come through that door." "They won't," Martha said firmly. "Our men won't let them." More gunfire, then an eerie silence fell. The 2 women exchanged glances in the dim light of their single lantern. Was it over? Or were the attackers regrouping? A sudden thud against the cellar door made them both jump. "Theodora," Victor's voice strained but blessedly alive. "Martha." "It's safe to come out." They emerged to a scene of controlled chaos. 2 of the ranch hands were wounded but alive, receiving treatment from Frank's steady hands. The front window of the house was shattered, and bullet holes riddled the porch. "They're gone," Victor said, drawing Theodora into a fierce embrace. "Driven off. We wounded at least 3 of them." "Blackburn?" she asked. "Not among them, as far as we could tell." Victor's face was grim with exhaustion and anger. But this was his work. One of the wounded men confirmed it before they retreated. "What will we do now? End this once and for all?" Victor turned to Frank. "How soon can you have the men ready to ride?" "At dawn," Frank replied without hesitation. Theodora clutched Victor's arm. "What are you planning?" His eyes were hard as flint. "They attacked our home, endangered our people. No more waiting for Blackburn to strike again. We're taking the fight to him." Despite her fears, Theodora recognized the justice in Victor's words. Blackburn wouldn't stop until he was forced to. Each attack had escalated, the next might prove deadly. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said, knowing she couldn't dissuade him. "Promise me you'll come back to me." He kissed her with fierce tenderness. Nothing could keep me from returning to you." The next morning, Theodora watched from the porch as Victor led 15 armed men toward Tombstone. They made an imposing force, determined, disciplined, riding with purpose rather than rage. "They'll succeed," Martha said, standing beside her. "And when they return, this shadow will finally be lifted from us all." The day passed with excruciating slowness. Theodora kept busy treating the wounded men who had remained behind, cleaning up the damage to the house, preparing food for the returning riders. Anything to keep her mind from dwelling on the danger Victor faced. It was nearly midnight when they heard the riders approaching. Theodora rushed outside, lantern held high, heart pounding with hope and fear. Victor rode at the head of the column, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Alive. Unharmed. She nearly collapsed with relief. His expression as he dismounted was complex, grim satisfaction mingled with something like regret. He gathered her close, his embrace carrying a desperate quality that told her how worried he had been for her safety, even as she worried for his. "It's done," he said simply when they finally parted. "Blackburn won't trouble us again." Inside, over hot coffee and Martha's fresh bread, he told the full story. They had ridden into Tombstone prepared for battle, only to discover that Blackburn had indeed returned from San Francisco with hired guns in tow. "Sheriff Hollister met us at the edge of town," Victor explained. He'd already heard about the attack on the ranch and had deputies watching Blackburn's house. "When we arrived, Blackburn and his men were preparing to ride out, presumably for a second attack." "What happened?" Theodora asked, clutching his hand. "We confronted them in the street." The sheriff tried to keep the peace, demanded Blackburn surrender peacefully to answer for the attack on our ranch. Victor's expression darkened. "Blackburn drew first, shot at me, missed after that." "A gunfight," Theodora whispered. Victor nodded grimly. 3 of Blackburn's men dead, 2 wounded. The rest scattered once they saw which way the wind was blowing. He hesitated. "And Blackburn himself?" "Dead, yes." There was no triumph in Victor's voice, only a solemn acknowledgement. He refused to surrender, kept firing even when he was hit. The sheriff said it was suicide by lawmen. He knew his reputation was finished in Tombstone either way. Theodora sat in stunned silence, trying to process the news. The man who had nearly become her husband, who had terrorized them for months, was gone. Relief washed over her, followed by a strange, unexpected sadness, not for Blackburn himself, but for the wasted life, the darkness that had consumed him. "The sheriff found papers in Blackburn's study," Victor continued. "Records of his dealings with the bride agency. He'd been working with them for years, paying extra to ensure he received young, vulnerable women with no family connections. There were details about his previous wives, 2 evidence he destroyed in Tombstone, but kept copies in a San Francisco bank vault. Evidence of murder." Theodora asked softly. "Enough to hang him many times over had it come to trial." Victor squeezed her hand. "You were to be his 4th victim, Theodora. He'd already planned it down to the accident that would befall you after he'd secured your inheritance from your parents." A chill ran through her at how narrowly she had escaped such a fate. "Thank God you intervened that day at the stagecoach. Thank God you were wise enough to be cautious," he countered, raising her hand to his lips. "Many women would have honored the contract regardless." Later that night, as they lay together in their bed, Theodora finally felt the tension of the past months releasing its hold. Victor's arms around her were strong and protective, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. "I keep thinking," she murmured into the darkness, "about how differently things could have gone if you hadn't been there that day." "But I was," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And you're here safe where you belong." She raised herself on one elbow to look down at his face, touched by silver moonlight through the window. I love you, Victor Kincaid, not because you saved me, but because of who you are, the man I've come to know and cherish. Joy bloomed in his eyes. And I love you, Theodora Kincaid, more than I ever thought possible. Their kiss sealed the declaration, a promise more binding than any marriage vow. Spring came to the Arizona territory in a blaze of wildflowers and renewed hope. The ranch prospered under Victor and Theodora's combined management, his practical knowledge complemented by her organizational skills and fresh perspective. Her small school had grown to include 12 students from surrounding ranches, their eager minds thriving under her guidance. Victor had built proper desks and commissioned a real blackboard from Tucson, taking obvious pride in his wife's accomplishments. In April, Theodora confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. They were expecting a child, due in late autumn. Victor's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for: joy, wonder, and tender concern. "Our family," he said, his hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. "A new generation for the ranch." As they stood together on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the desert gold, Theodora reflected on the strange, twisting path that had led her to this place. The desperate decision to become a mail-order bride, the terrifying moment of arrival in Tombstone, the unexpected intervention that had changed her fate. "What are you thinking about?" Victor asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About promises," she said, leaning into his embrace. "The promise I made to a stranger I never met. The promise you made when you claimed me instead." She smiled up at him. "And all the promises we've kept to each other since." He bent to kiss her, his love evident in the gentle touch. "The best promise I ever made was the one at the stagecoach that day. She was promised to me instead. I didn't know then how true those words would become." "They were always true," Theodora said softly. "Even before we knew it." As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky, the Kincaids turned toward their home, toward their future, secure in the knowledge that some promises, once made, were destined to be kept forever. 7 years later, the Kincaid Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in the Arizona territory. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, 6-year-old Samuel, with his father's blue eyes and stubborn chin, 4-year-old Elizabeth, who had inherited her mother's auburn hair and love of books, and 1-year-old James, still toddling unsteadily but determined to keep up with his older siblings. Theodora's school had become officially recognized by the territorial government, with a proper schoolhouse built halfway between the ranch and the nearest small town, making education accessible to children across the region. She still taught 3 days a week, with a young woman from Tucson handling the remaining days. Victor had been elected to the territorial legislature, his natural leadership and integrity earning him respect throughout Arizona. Though the position required occasional trips to Prescott, he always returned to the ranch as quickly as possible, unwilling to be separated from his family for long. On the anniversary of their wedding each year, they still told the story of how they met, of a mail-order bride promised to a villain, and the cowboy who claimed her instead. Their children demanded the tale repeatedly, delighting in the romance and adventure, too young yet to fully comprehend the danger their mother had escaped. "And then Papa said, 'She was promised to me instead,'" Samuel recited one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "That's right," Victor confirmed, his arm around Theodora's shoulders. "Best words I ever spoke." Theodora looked at her husband, the years having only deepened her love for him. The gray beginning to touch his temples, the laugh lines around his eyes, The strong hands that had built their home and cradled their children, all were precious to her. "I think," she said softly, for his ears alone, "that we were always promised to each other. Fate just needed a little help bringing us together." Victor's kiss was his answer, a reaffirmation of the promise they had made 7 years before and would keep for all the years to come.